Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we sharpen our styluses. Styluses? Just hard to say it as it is to control it. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. How's it going, Mark?
It's going great. Patrick, I have slowly been making my way through episodes of Columbo.
Yes.
I love a good mystery show. But I am watching it and I'm enjoying it a lot. But I can't help but think, and I kind of feel bad about this, that I think Columbo probably smells really bad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if nothing else, he smells extremely like cigar smoke and chili, and not like good chili, right? He just smells like smoke and meat. That's what he smells like.
Yeah, it's
And beans.
it's kind of
That coat's not clean.
The coat is not clean. His car probably smells like, like the upholstery, smells like stale farts. Probably like sausage egg McMuffins. It kind of like,
And that dog smells terrible too.
oh my gosh. It kind of makes me uncomfortable watching it a little bit, because I just imagine I think he really smells bad.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's like part of the ruse. It's part of what he does to disarm the people that he's investigating, right? Like they're like, this weirdo smells bad, and then they just tell him everything.
Yeah, it's I don't know. And then I got thinking, do you think everybody in the 70s smelled bad? Do you think all those heavy synthetic fabrics? I don't know. My mind went to some very strange places. I'm still enjoying it. It's a great show, but I'm very worried about the personal hygiene of everybody in that era.
I mean, I think you're right to be concerned about it. Again, everyone is smoking all the time. So they, at the very least, smell like that, right?
They're smoking, they're drinking, all of that just exude from their pores. It's a lot. It's a lot. I'm glad that there's no sense of sound version of
Sure, there's no smell-o-vision of Columbo.
Yeah. I'm not there's no cards where you're scratch and sniffing as you watch the episodes.
You get to time it with the episode. Sarah and I are watching the Scream movies right now. We just finished the second one, and there's a part in it where Gale Weathers, Courtney Cox's character, calls out Dewey about being David Arquette's character about being a small-time doofy sheriff, and he's like, "Did you ever stop to think that that's part of what I do to disarm people as I'm investigating them is to act all folksy?" And I was like, "It's just like Columbo."
Can I ask, when you guys are making your
Yes.
way through the movies, do you intend to take a detour for the MTV TV show of the same name?
Mark, absolutely not.
Okay.
One of the things that feels like a bummer to me as we're watching just even in the second one, it feels way more TV. The first movie feels like a movie, and the second movie, while still a movie, elements of TV start to creep into it. Because I don't know how long it's been since the last time you watched Scream 2, and I'm sorry, we will be talking about Kid Icarus Uprising in a second here. But the cast of Scream 2 fills out the roster with a lot of great actors that I primarily think of as TV actors, right?
Interesting.
Laurie Metcalf and
oh my gosh, that's right.
Mr. Justified, Timothy Olyphant, Joshua Jackson is in there a little bit, Sarah Michelle Gellar, where it's these are people who are superstars on TV, but they're superstars on TV, and we're in a movie. And I guess even Neve Campbell is the anchor for the whole series, and obviously she's from TV as well. So what do I know? Mark, speaking of what do I know, Sonic Forces, my copy of it, would you like to borrow it? You can. All you gotta do is email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send you my copy of this game warning, there may be my copy of Untitled Goose Game in there instead. There's nothing you can do about it. It just pops out and stabs you like a pair of killers working together, as it is the case in every Scream movie. Actually, I don't remember if that's true. In the first two, it's definitely true, and it's probably true in later Scream movies as well. And then, this is the part where we would move on to saying this is Kid Icarus month, so play along with us. But you've done it. You've reached the end of the Kid Icarus games we could possibly play. So, Mark, let's get into it. Let's talk about the 2012 3DS game, Kid Icarus Uprising. Mark, let's start where we always start with our first impressions of this game. Did you play it when it came out? What were your thoughts on it when it came out? What is your personal history with Kid Icarus Uprising?
Yeah, I've never played it. I got a 3DS not when it first launched, not even really, like, again, my 3DS, the one I still have is a 3DS XL that's like the year of Luigi. And I think I got it around Christmas time. And Kid Icarus Uprising, like, Kid Icarus is not a franchise is familiar with. I was interested because it was like Project Sora, it was Sakurai, but the reputation of it being like weird to play and like and it needing like the holder that it came in and all that kind of stuff that came with the game, it just passed me by, especially since I had a very, I would say, more like casual relationship with the 3DS at this time, where I was playing more like PlayStation 3 and eventually PlayStation 4. And so it just wasn't something that I felt a need to play. How about you, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I didn't come to the 3DS right away. It's a not something I got in launch window. And like I didn't pick up a 3DS until after the price drop. So like, yeah, I was definitely not like hurting for games at that time. And when I did get my 3DS, I feel like the games I wanted to get were so like laid out for me already. Like I had such a list of games that I wanted to play / needed to play, that like Kid Icarus Uprising, for a game that I knew to be a like flagship showpiece for like how the 3DS worked. I mean, I guess even by the time I bought the 3DS, I was not like into the bells and whistles of the 3DS, right? It's so weird to like always reflect on the first like couple of years of any new hardware, where you're like, oh, and then of course there's a mini game where you have to blow into the microphone and then like scrub the touchpad and like tilt the things and all this stuff. And so I think that's sort of like where I lumped this game in with, and like it is that, certainly it is a showpiece for the 3DS, but I don't think it is like a gimmick fest, if I can make that distinction.
Yeah, I agree with you, which is interesting because like, I think it would be easy to characterize like the control scheme as a gimmick. And I don't think that's true, because when I think of gimmick, I think of like, something that's kind of tossed off, something that's kind of,
Yeah.
like yeah, just like not integral to it. But this is like, for all of its faults in the control scheme, it is thought out. Like, it is considered, and it's bold. And so for that reason, like it's definitely not gimmicky. There are aspects of the game that I think aren't necessarily gimmicky, but do maybe fall into that. Like, there's like the AR card capability, which
yeah. I mean, there are the AR cards and like the Street Pass functionality, which is sort of just something that like all first party 3DS games sort of fell victim to, especially early on, where you're like, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around like what the actual use case is, where any of that's going to be either fun or something you're looking forward to as you're playing the rest of the game.
Yeah. And then it also, I think it uses the step counter as part of like the idle thing. Like, the more steps you do, you can earn eggs and stuff like that. I don't know. Like, and I think, like, that's, again, I don't have anything against it. I am curious, Patrick, like, moving past our initial experience, like our experience or lack of experience with the game when it first came out, I'm interested with your experience playing it now. Like, what is your overall like temperature or takeaway on the game?
So I I have such a weird relationship with this game because there is part of me that loves it, right? There's part of me that is like totally enamored with the story and the characters, and even when I get into the groove of it, every bit of the gameplay loop, right? Like I think the flying sections are super fun and like spectacular, and I think when I am like really in the right mindset and like really plugged into it, I feel like the on ground like combat sections are also super fun. But I think that it's this kind of leads into like my main, like the way I have to think about this game is I almost think about it like it's a VR experience. Because like when I play a game in VR, I expect to have increased immersion. I expect to be like inconvenienced or uncomfortable in some way, and I expect to lose a little bit of like reliability of control over the character, right? And all three of those things are qualities of Kid Icarus Uprising, right? Like I don't have the quite exact control that I want over Pit. He's dodging when I just want him to run in a direction. He's turning either too far or not far enough or whatever. Um, I'm like hunched over the stand that's holding my 3DS up, or like, you know, propped it up against my knee, which is, my leg is folded up all over so that like I can have everything in front of me. And it like, especially this is a game that I will play with the 3D slider up because it looks so good and so cool. But what is what is your experience? What is your relationship with this game now? How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I agree with you that it is. I feel really conflicted about it. I didn't finish the game. It wore me down. Like I started to dread playing it because it felt really like the on the ground segments felt really repetitive to me, and I wasn't having fun with it. And so I eventually just stopped because I found it really like frustrating and not really fun to play. But for the first couple of hours, like I really liked it. Like I had a lot of
Yeah.
fun because I really do. It is so like unique among games in general that and it's a lot of fun. Like it really does feel like a showcase for the Nintendo 3DS. Like the characters and the dialogue and like the it's really interesting because I feel like the kind of like breezy, self-referential dialogue heavy nature of it could be really grating and annoying,
It's
but it's
really not though.
not. It's
Yeah.
like fun. Do you know what it reminded me of? And do you know who
Hmm.
Pitt reminds me of so much in, even though like the way he talks is Tom Holland's Spider-Man or Peter Parker.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
I got heavy vibes of that from Pitt. And like so like I think that part is fun. I think the characters are fun and the dialogue is fun. I like the flying segments that start every level. That reminded me a lot of like a theme park ride, like being in Star Tours is what it reminded
Yeah.
me of, because
Totally.
you have Pitt being like the character who's like, whoa, this is out of control, and then you have Palutena being like, I'm gonna stop you right here for a second, and it felt very Star Toursy to me,
Yeah.
and so
That's funny.
I thought that was fun, but and like I like seeing the characters, like the Kid Icarus characters, in rendered in 3D, and see like all the bosses and the enemy types that I know from the first two games. I don't think I would have appreciated it very much, like if I had played it when this game first came out. After playing the other two Kid Icarus games, and like, oh, that's funny that there's a tempura wizard along with like
Right.
an eggplant wizard and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot I like, but I really, really just hit a wall with it about chapter 13, where I was like, I don't want to turn this thing on again. Like, I'm just done. Like, I have experienced my joy from this game, but it
Right.
feels like I'm just doing the same thing over and over, and it's not really giving me anything new.
Right. So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about like just the sort of like structure of the game and like the various ways that like you can run up against these walls. Because I think that that is a totally legit. Uh, I think this is a game that is easy to burn out on. And just sort of like again drawing back to my like VR experience comparison, that like I do feel like I play the game for like 2 hours and then I need to step away. Like I can't stay in it for very long. Even if I give up on the 3D controls, like I just get tired of contorting my hand into like a weird little claw, and like I don't know, there's it's awesome how much stuff the game throws at you, but like it becomes overwhelming at a point. And there's also just like an aspect of when I play a lot of games now, I tend to eventually like turn the sound off and just like put a podcast on or something. And like this game requires all of your attention, visually and audioly, that where it's just like you have to you have to be playing this game. You can't do something else while you're playing this game.
Yeah, it does require all of your attention. I think we should probably just briefly explain the control scheme, because if you're familiar with this game, if you've heard of this game, you've probably heard that the control scheme is notoriously like difficult or notoriously like weird. It's just very specific to the 3DS. And
Yeah.
so the game is really broken into two segments in each level. There's the opening segment, which is like a flying segment, and it's very much like Sin and Punishment, like that sort of thing where you could
I think of it as Star Fox.
Yeah, it is. It's very Star Foxy. You're playing controlling Pit with the circle pad, and then you fire Pit's weapon with the L button. And so you have to.
And when you say you control Pit, like you are being flown, your perspective is like being flown around by Palutena. You don't get to control that, but you're just controlling Pit's relative position on the screen with the circle pad.
Yeah, it's all like XY position. Like there's no depth that you're controlling. So that's what the circle pad. You're using the L trigger to fire his weapon. So that kind of requires you to hold it in a very specific way. But then in order to aim where Pit's weapon is firing, it requires you to use the stylus and the touch screen. And so it's kind of like you're doing those three things at once. It's not as bad as like, trying to pat your head and rub your belly or whatever, but it is
but it's not easy.
It's like it's not intuitive.
Yeah, the L button and the circle pad are so close together that like there's a lot of just like kind of micro pinching that is going on.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel totally natural. If you were playing with like a regular controller, there's like some natural space between where the left thumbstick is and like a left trigger or even a left bumper. Like it just feels less like you're really getting in the nitty gritty.
But I think those segments for me like were the ones that felt the most natural. And they're not very long. I think they're maybe like 5 minutes max.
The power of flight lasts for 5 minutes.
Because I think they're really fun and like a great showcase for the 3DS's graphics. With the 3D slider up, which I hardly ever use. And they feel very, again, like a theme park ride. So I think they're really enjoyable, but like the gameplay part of it is pretty slight. I don't think, and if you try to up like the difficulty, they become not fun really quick.
Right. They become like brutal bullet hell galleries of like just trying in vain to dodge everything while also getting rid of the bad guys. But I mean, like, one thing that is nice about these segments is that there is this sort of like constant banter between Pit and either Palutena or like one of the bad guys or whoever else is like present at that point in the story. And it really does run the gamut of like enemies and allies and people who have been one and are now the other. And it plays in such a way where like you can see the character like faces on the bottom screen if you chance to look down. But mostly you just like hear their voices and like what they're saying, like just through the audio cues of the game. And there's a lot of that that's telling you like what's next and what to expect and like how to strategize. But some of it that's just like color and fun and jokes and stuff. And it feels so much like Star Fox 64, which is just like my go-to thought for that is like I'm flying around. It's a cool roller coaster, and these characters are talking to me, and I feel like close to those characters. It's amazing to me how effective it is at building those relationships and building my affinity for them as I'm playing the game.
I totally agree, but for whatever reason, I feel like they like if this game was entirely made up of those segments, I don't think it would be fun. Like
Right.
it's the fact that they're 5 minutes and you're just like, okay, I know I'm going to get this at the beginning of every level, and I look forward to the beginning of every level because it's my favorite part. But they don't wear out their welcome because they are like that they're going to be fairly brief.
Yeah, yes. Let's talk about the second part of it, and then we can sort of like loop back to how they connect. But so after you finish the flying segments, you are then on the ground, right? You have infiltrated whatever area you're into, and you're gonna book it to the boss. Um, and this is where the controls are tested as much as humanly possible, because now your stylus controls, you are sort of being the right thumbstick in like a two-stick control scheme, but with a stylus, which means that you are looking around using the stylus and also still using it to aim your shots. So like it there's so much heavy lifting that goes into what your right hand is doing with a pen on your touch screen, that like it just becomes difficult to like maneuver Pit anywhere. And also like I mentioned before, like I will frequently dodge in a direction when I just mean to get Pit like running. The difference between like pushing the stick a little bit and pushing it all the way, it's a very like Smash Brothers sort of relationship with the circle pad, right? Like there's a difference between you tilting and between you like slamming the circle pad in any one direction.
Yeah, and I never came to grips with that. Like I could never really finesse it so Pitt was doing what I wanted him to do. And the you're talking about this the stylus kind of acts as both the aiming device but also how you control the camera. And the way that they want you when there's a brief tutorial at the beginning, and I mean very brief, what the way that they want you to do it is, or they tell you to do it is like you like almost like spin the camera. You use the stylus to like
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 a
spin the
globe.
camera like a globe, and then you're supposed to,
Yeah.
tap the stylus on the screen when you want it to stop. And that never, I ended up not doing that, maybe to my detriment. Maybe what I should have done is learn to do it that way, but I did not find that to be like unintuitive or, I didn't feel like I was ever in control if I tried to do that.
Yeah, I always felt more like I was just like swiping
Yeah.
just to like, kind of change my perspective a little bit.
Because I feel like it's important to remember, and it really comes into play here that the 3DS bottom touchscreen is a resistive touchscreen instead of capacitive, like like your
Yeah.
iPhone or whatever is. And so what that means is it actually requires like pressure on certain points in order to trigger the touchscreen. So when you are sliding, it requires a little bit of pressure. When you want it to stop, it requires a little bit more pressure. And I think like if it was like a touchscreen like your iPhone or whatever, then it would have been better because it would have been more responsive and it wouldn't require, because again, you're kind of gripping this thing in a weird way already.
Yep.
So then to have to require like additional pressure to be placed on it just is like one more thing that just doesn't really click. But like I was saying in the beginning, like it's not gimmicky, like it feels really thought out, but it
Yeah.
feels like one of those things where the people who are designing it and playtesting it put hundreds of hours into it and we're like, great, like we got this. But I imagine when they like got it in front of people, it was a little bit of like, oh boy, the learning curve on this is higher than we anticipated.
Yeah, and I think that definitely is the case, that like if you want to play Kid Icarus Uprising, you have to like commit to figuring out how this control scheme works for you. And there are a couple different ways like in the control settings that you can choose to like use different button inputs, but there's really no way that like marries like there's no way to make it feel intuitive, right? If you want to control Pit with the face buttons and control the reticle position with your left hand and the stylus, like that's an option for you. And there are like various little things like that that you can tweak, but like nothing that fully makes it just like a twin stick shooter or like third person combat game.
That is such a good point that I didn't even really consider. This must be a nightmare for left-handed people.
I mean, I guess you can do it, and honestly, like putting the like Pit movement on something a little bit more of a
Like
like
analog.
D-pad, yeah, it doesn't really seem like, if all you have to do is like double tap in one direction to either like dodge
That's
or
true.
run,
That may actually be better.
that may almost be better. Yeah, like who really knows? Because that's another thing that like you have to wrestle with, is that you will be dashing a lot by design and by accident. But by design, a to dodge out of the way of attacks and to perform more powerful attacks. Because you can, if you're just holding down the left trigger or whatever it is, the left bumper, the L button, Pit will just like fire continuously. Or you can let off it for a second and he charges up, so it'll be a more powerful shot the next time he shoots. Or I guess both of these at the same time, you can dash either forward to the side or backwards and attack. And it does a more powerful version of those attacks. But so it means that you are like negotiating with the circle pad and the stylus for aiming, and deciding whether you are depressing the L button all at the same time. And it's like just a set of skills that you don't use in any other game, and it's just simply non-transferable to any other experience in your life.
Yeah, yeah. And so in these ground segments, it's kind of like they all follow a very similar pattern, and there are variations within them, like in the look, in the theme, in some of the challenges within it. But for the most part, it's like go into a room, defeat all the enemies, go into the next room, defeat all the enemies, and repeat until you clear the dungeon and make your way into like the boss battle.
Yeah, and there's kind of like the illusion of exploration in these things where like you can go down, and especially as you get later into the game, there's a little bit more of like, oh, there are some dead ends, but like none that are ever really very far, and you're never like looking for, with very rare exceptions, you're never looking for like a key or an item that will like help you progress through the dungeon. It's kind of just like get into the next room, kill everyone there, go into the next room, and continue.
Yeah, the other area where there's like a little bit of more exploration is there are certain paths that can only be opened if you're playing on certain difficulty levels. And so if difficulty in this game is not like easy, medium, hard, or anything like that, it is a slider, like a spectrum that can go from 0 to 9. And the gates are basically like, okay, if you're playing on 5 or above, you can go into this extra area. If you're playing on 9, you can go into this extra area. So it's like another incentive for you to play on different difficulties, like if you want to see everything in the game. But
even that, like it is again just like the illusion of exploration, because it's when you open one of those like higher difficulty gate areas, it's just another room and like another treasure in there. So like I guess it's exploration in that you have explored one additional room, but not in that like you have to learn to navigate anything.
Yeah. And like I didn't really again like these on the ground sections wore thin with me really quickly. Like I thought some of the design was cool. I think which one was it that actually kind of looked like that Star Fox polygon-y thing? Was it like
that's Pandora's Labyrinth?
Yeah, Pandora's Labyrinth of Deceit. Like I thought that one was aesthetically cool. And I think the bosses in this are pretty interesting as well, at least the ones that I saw before I stopped playing because I got so frustrated with the game. But yeah, I really just found these on the ground segments to just kind of be a slog where I was just dreading having to go through them, and I just wanted to get over with as quickly as possible.
The on the ground segments are also where you start to feel the effects of the different weapons that you equip, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and like hugely, right? When you're in the sky portions, like it sort of doesn't matter what your weapon is, just like what its attack power is. But as soon as you're on the ground, and the game has what, like 10 different types of weapons, and all of them have different like different firing speeds and different like range of melee attacks, and like every weapon does feel, or every type of weapon feels like genuinely different to wield, right? And once I don't know about you, Mark, but like once I wrapped my head around like this is how you use blades, I was like not gonna move off of blades.
Oh really? Yeah, I didn't use blades. I probably should have. For whatever reason, I really wanted like the ranged weapons. I wanted the ones that I could attack from far away. But I am curious, maybe not tempted to go back and try it, but I do wonder if like if I had been more heavily melee, that would have been more enjoyable to kind of like treat it as a brawler almost.
Yeah, well, and like that is interesting because like I usually, and every now and then I would like divert and be like, I'll try this one with the staff or with a bow and arrow or palms. There are some of the weapon types here that I don't know what they're supposed to be. I don't know how Pit is dealing damage. So like sometimes I was using something that was more ranged, and then I usually missed that like, I like sort of like sniping as I'm moving in, and then like
Mm-hmm.
go in real close and like finish him off with a melee attack. But not really possible when you go in with like a bow and arrow, for example.
Right. Yeah, totally. So I'm curious then, did you use, because one of the systems in this game is you don't really upgrade weapons, or I guess maybe you do. But where I focused most of my attention is on the fusion system, where
Yeah,
basically it gives you like
same.
a spreadsheet, like a grid that's like, okay, if you combine this weapon and this weapon, it turns it into this weapon. And that's where I would almost every level like go in and just be like, okay, like what does what's the most powerful thing I have? What does this weapon type do? And just kind of like mess around with it that way. And I thought the grid system was like a cool way to do upgrades, like this fusion system. And I thought the way they displayed it was really clear. Like I felt very confident I knew what I was getting when I fused these items, which I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes with like these upgrade systems or fusion systems in games, like I feel like I'm kind of winging it, but I didn't in this case.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's very clear about what you're doing, and like at the end of the day, like there is a number associated with all of the items. It's a 3-digit number, um, and the higher the value of the weapon, the better it is, right? So like if you just see a weapon whose numbers are higher than what you were using previously, you're like, yep, doing it. And like it doesn't show you exactly like it deals this much damage this way and this much damage this way, but that's sort of where the difference in the weapon types come into play. And so once like what weapons you're comfortable with, you just chase that kind of weapon at higher and higher numbers.
Yeah, one thing that um so they call it the value of it is that 3-digit number, and the higher the
Yeah.
value is, the more powerful it is. Which makes sense, but also kind of bugged me a little bit because there like is no power indicator other than the value. And so you sort by power, but all it says is value. And so initially, like before I understood that the two were
Mm.
synonymous, essentially, I did find it a little bit oh, like is it valuable because it's rare, or is it valuable because it's powerful? And I do wish that
Well,
would
and
have been a
also
little bit more explicit.
is it valuable because it has extra bonuses on it, which is like
Right.
another thing too, is that weapons as you encounter them. So that there are like the 9 or 10 different types of weapons, and then a dozen varieties of each of those types of weapons. But not all of those weapons have the same bonuses on them. It's sort of like random which bonuses are on them. So when you combine two weapons, they turn into a third weapon with a power level that is, or a value, whatever it is, that number that's like within that same range, and then combining some of the bonuses from each of the weapons. And again, it always shows you what it's going to get. So it's not a risky system to engage in.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Totally.
But then there's also the part where you can spend the hearts that you gain throughout the levels to buy weapons that are usually like leaps and bounds more powerful, which is, I think, something that you do need to engage with further along in the game so that you can like start getting weapons that are in the like upper 200s or like 300s, and then start fusing them together to get even more powerful weapons that way.
Yeah, there's a lot of like little aspects of the game that
Yeah.
that you can engage with, or like really like not engage with. And it's this feels, I now looking back on it, a very like Masahiro Sakurai game.
Yes.
Like it
Yes.
has so many things that I associate with Smash Brothers, but that are like in this Kid Icarus Uprising. Like and it may have been in Smash 4. I can't remember as well because I didn't really play that much of it. But at least on the Wii U, but like on uh in Smash Ultimate, there's in like the classic mode where you play as like each individual character, right? That
Yeah.
has a difficulty slider that is
Yep.
exactly like the one in Kid Icarus, where it's like you choose whether you want it to be difficulty from like 0 to 9, but your reward is greater if you
Yeah.
do it on a higher difficulty. Kid Icarus Uprising is interesting because they tell you each level where they're like, like here's the one where we think you should go, and
Right.
then
Try this, it
try
says.
try this. But then if you want more, like the more you want, the more hearts you have to pay in order to unlock it. But also, the less you want, the more hearts you have to pay to unlock it as well.
Right. Like they want you to go down the path that they're putting you on. The thing that's tricky, and I guess I'm curious to know what your approach to the difficulty slider was, because one of the things that I took into consideration while working on it was if you die, you get to basically continue from not right that exact same place where you died, but just like maybe a room back or like a screen back, and they just knock you down one full difficulty level. So I usually picked a difficulty level knowing that I was going to die once.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I mostly just stuck with like whatever the tried this, just the whatever one they recommended in the beginning.
Mm.
I didn't really mess with it that much. But yeah, that's actually a good point about because again, that's exactly like it is in Smash Brothers Ultimate, is that
Yeah.
when you die it knocks you down like a power level. Also they have like what they call treasure hunt in this game, which are like the hammers in Smash Brothers. Same sort of thing. There's like a mural, and then you're chipping away at the individual blocks, and it's you lose a block or a block breaks when you achieve something, like you use 10 weapons, the thing breaks, and then you can see what all of the requirements are to break one of the blocks. And so they offer you feathers. That's the use for feathers in this game, where it's like you can earn feathers. So if you don't think you're going to achieve whatever the requirement is, you can break it. There's also like this idols thing where you earn eggs, and then you put the egg. It's like gotcha basically.
Yeah.
Then you
totally
put
gotcha.
you put eggs into this like spring, and it tells you, okay, depending on how many eggs or how rare the eggs you put in, the chance that you're going to get something new is like 93.6%. And then you spring it, you throw the eggs into the air, and they turn into like little stickers or whatever that you're just adding to your collection. There's just so much going on in this game.
Right. And those are basically just like these statues from Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
It was freaking me out a little bit when I was doing the idol toss and getting idols for weapons and then not having those weapons.
Yeah, that totally that did like I didn't understand that at first. I didn't understand what was going on.
Took me a second to wrap my head around it. I want to go back to the shoot, what did you call it? The treasure hunt. Because you start off with just one sort of mural for that's like Palutena's treasure hunt. And you're right that a lot of the squares are like, kill 50 enemies, or equip a club in a fight, or fuse this many weapons. But there are also some of them where it's like, use a staff on this level at least difficulty level 2. And then there are other ones that are like, beat this chapter at difficulty level 7. So there are like all these different ways that the game like sort of incentivizes you to go back into the levels and try them again. And that's something that feels very like sticky and fun and like engaging to me, were the levels any shorter than they are. Because like I did this with the first 2 levels, like go back in the first 2 chapters, and like play them again per whatever little requirements were in the treasure hunt, because I'm like, oh yeah, like I can do that. Like this is something I can tackle. It'll take me like 15 minutes to do each one of these levels. But then like you get later in the game, and like some of them start, some of the achievements are like, finish this level in 38 minutes or less, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that is so long for you to like ask me to like go back into this level and like experience the same thing again. So like I feel like in that way it doesn't totally, it seems like it's going to be an interesting reward system, but like isn't. One thing that I do think is neat is that as you play the game further, you get a second treasure hunt, a Viridi map, and Viridi is like the goddess of nature, who is a sometimes antagonist and sometimes ally. And then even deep enough into the game, there's a Hades treasure hunt as well. So you've got all of these different cues for like individual challenges that you can take on if you want to. I sincerely do think that if you wanted to, you could just play this game forever. Like there's no end to it asking you to accomplish things.
Yeah. Oh, completely. Like I really feel like this is the same like labor of love that the Smash Brothers games are. Like
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
same care and like I'm just gonna pack this to the gills with like content and really make this a love letter to Kid Icarus. I think that is all there. You know, after playing with this game a bit, I think back to that quote that we had from Sakurai maybe like 3 or 4 weeks ago in that news episode where I think maybe it was even the anniversary of Kid Icarus Uprising, and somebody on Twitter asked him, "Hey, like,
Yeah.
will you remake this game for Switch?" And he said something like, and I am sure I'm not getting this exactly right, but I think the spirit of it was like, "No, probably not." Like that was kind of like a painful and like difficult thing, and after like
Yeah, I believe he said it would be difficult
yeah,
to
because
develop it for Switch.
and I after playing this and looking at like how much was put into it, I wonder if it not like difficult, not necessarily even on like a technical level, but difficult on like a emotional or psychological level because there's like again like so much put into it, and I don't think that the reaction to it, like the reception was generally pretty good, but I don't think it's like a beloved game, and so I think it'd be like
Well, I
difficult
feel
to
like
revisit.
now when you like drudge up the history of Kid Icarus Uprising, I feel like it gets, and maybe this is just me, maybe not everyone is experiencing this, but it gets kind of like pushed into the same pile as like Metroid Prime Hunters or Star Fox Zero, where you're like, here is a fundamentally like good game that Nintendo had to Nintendo on, and the controls were not right. Like that it just isn't, it isn't the way we expect to engage with a third or first person action game, and so it just like kind of falls apart. Like we have this gaming vocabulary, and even though the game comes up with like a decent alternative, it's not the language we're all already speaking.
Mm-hmm.
um and so like I think like to your point, it doesn't hold like super high esteem in like the collective gaming consciousness right now. And part of that is also just like Kid Icarus, right? Like that IP is such a, we know Pit because he's in Smash, and like kind of that's it.
Yeah.
um but it is shocking to me how much the first 9 chapters of this game are like a straight love letter to the original Kid Icarus, right? You fight all the same bosses. It uses a ton of the same music, both in like the original like 8-bit arrangements and in like huge symphonic awesome the music in this game rules.
Amazing.
It's so good. But like the first 9 chapters, and like, can we get into like the story spoilers
Yeah,
here? We
sure.
think that's okay. So the first 9, the ninth chapter ends with you defeating Medusa, which is where basically the first Kid Icarus game ends. And leading up to that, you fight all the bosses from the original Kid Icarus. You fight the Hydra, you fight even Thanatos, who was a bouncing snake and is now like a cool like
I
Charles
liked
Nelson
that
Riley
fight.
demon.
Yeah.
He's great. He's great. And like, yeah, so all the bosses like come back in one form or another. The Reapers have their own hideout, and their symphonic music is the same theme as when the Reapers spot you in the original Kid Icarus, but like with horns, and it's amazing. So all of that, you're sort of like playing through it, playing through the events of Kid Icarus again, but they're commenting on it like this, like you can tell that they're experiencing it again, and they'll flash up like images on the bottom screen of like the old 8-bit sprites being like, this is what Pandora looked like before, and now you're fighting Pandora again. And then uh, at the end of chapter 9, it is revealed that all of this is like a ruse put on by Hades, because he's trying to harvest a bunch of souls, and get the humans fighting over whatever. And then the game sort of like morphs from there and becomes its own sequel. But in that way, it's almost a Metal Gear Solid 2 level of like taking an original story and like twisting it and being like, now we have to deal with the twist. And like, I don't think the narrative of this game gets enough credit because the structure is very, you go out on a mission, Pit gets filled in on the mission on the way. And the way that changes throughout the game as you lose contact with Palutena, as there's a time jump in this game where Pitt's consciousness gets put into a ring, and that ring winds up on the human warrior Magnus's hand, and you control Magnus for a while. Pitt gets his wings. Pitt comes back, and he gets his wings blown off at one point, and then you have to control Dark Pitt, who's like getting into a rewind fountain to like restore Pitt's wing. Like it does so many of these like awesome, huge, like story beats that are, you know, maybe like just pure anime hype stuff, but like I don't know, it works in a way that's like so endearing and so exciting, that like yeah, I mean it's just to go back to the labor of love thing. Like I think this is a love letter to games and a love letter to Kid Icarus specifically, and maybe that is hard to revisit.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe look, we are big Nintendo fans. We've talked about like
Yeah.
Kid Icarus is not really a franchise that either I have a lot of respect for Kid Icarus now. Like I appreciate the
Same.
first couple of games. Um and but it's not like a franchise that I like love. And so I think it's like it is for sure a love letter to Kid Icarus, but like I think the reason that people kind of have reacted to it the way they did and continue to do is because it's like people don't love Kid Icarus that much in a way that like they need more than just Pit in Smash Brothers to be like, "Oh, Kid Icarus, that's right, that's awesome." And so, not to say it's wasted effort, but I think that it's very interesting to me that so much passion was channeled into this game.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's so intriguing though. It's the kind of thing that makes me wish that like they would just do this with all of their old properties, right? Like go back to Star Tropics, skip 20 years and tell me what a new Star Tropics game is now. Elevate those two original games to, you know, this place where you have to, you know, make up the tempura night of Star Tropics. I don't know what that means, but like, you know, put everything under a microscope and deliver it back to us in a heightened, awesome, exciting way.
Yeah, because you know it has like so many. The thing that frustrates me about my experience with this game is it has so many elements that I think are cool or that I loved. Like I loved that the way that you equip skills is like how you use inventory in old school Resident Evil games, where it's like you know each skill has like is its own like Tetris block basically, and so and you have a little
Yeah,
square
you had to
and
put it
you've
on
got
a
to figure out
grid.
like how you're going to like what skills you want to use, and then how are you going to fit puzzle them in to this little block. Like I think all of those little elements are so like fun, but it's just in a game that like I find so frustrating to play, and not even. I think the control scheme is part of it, but I also just think like there's something about the gameplay loop that just like is missing for me and isn't like tacky enough to make me want to like come back.
Yeah, well, and maybe we can even use this point to segue into talking about the multiplayer, because the game does have a together mode, which is its version of multiplayer, which is you can do either locally or online. And we did get a an email from Andros, who listens to the show. Wrote in and said, one thing that I wanted to highlight that y'all might not cover is the game's amazing multiplayer modes. Free for All is a fun and versatile battle game, but my favorite was the team versus mode. Team Light plays against Team Dark, and your teams share a health bar. When that reaches zero, one of the players becomes Pit or Dark Pit, depending on the team, and the game becomes about defending that character. Because if Pit gets eliminated, your team loses. It's an interesting strategy thinker for a third-person shooter. So yeah, Mark, did you get a chance to mess around with the multiplayer at all here?
No, I didn't.
So I played a couple games of the light versus dark mode, which Andros refers to here. And like it is cool, it does work, but it's one of those things that feels like fundamentally, I don't. I mean, how much online play are people really doing on their 3DSs? You know, um, just in terms of things that are like sticky and tacky and would be like really fun and engaging in a like modern remake of this game. If these modes were on Switch, I feel like they would be unbeatable.
That's so yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think it's so hard because would I want to play this game on Switch? Well, I think that the controls possibly would be better, right? Because I'm assuming you just do
Just do
straight up
dual
like
stick,
dual
yeah.
analog. But part of me feels like what makes this game cool is its uniqueness and the way that it uses
Mhm.
like the 3DS to such great effect. And so, you could definitely make it work on Switch, I feel like, but then it just becomes like another like, you know, dual analog action game. And I feel like as much as the control scheme frustrated me, I do think you lose something that makes this game
That's
like unique
probably
and
true, yeah.
special.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like to me, just to put a almost Splatoon-esque like multiplayer uh, component onto what is a pretty compelling single player game, like that. That's a that's a pretty compelling combo of game modes. It's something that I would have liked to play more of, the light versus dark mode. Um, I wish we had like the ability, and I guess we could, right? Like we could schedule time to play it together. Um, but it's just one of those things where like the ease of online gaming now is so uh easier and quicker and all of that, and I don't really want to futz with it on 3DS.
Yeah, totally. One thing that is interesting about this game is that when it was released, the physical box copies came with a Nintendo 3DS stand. So basically, like a little
Yes.
stand that you could put your 3DS in, so you didn't have to try to hold up your 3DS while playing the game. And you had, which I do not have a stand for it, and so I had to find different ways to be able to like stand it, or by stand it I mean like withstand playing this game.
Yeah.
Just because like when I initially started playing it, I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And it's not like the initial playing it, but it's like playing it for long periods of time where it becomes like
Yep.
unbearable. Um and I think like anytime a game comes with like a stand or something like that, you're a little bit admitting defeat, or at
Right.
least trying to, but I
We
mean, on
messed
the
up.
other hand, I guess
Yeah.
like making it as positive an experience for people as possible. I was shocked that this game on the 3DS eShop, I bought it digitally, is still like $40. Like I don't think like
Yeah.
isn't on
Still a
the
full price
classics
game.
line or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. Like, and I don't know. Do you have like a sense of how Nintendo thinks of this game? Like maybe it's hard to say what Nintendo thinks of any games that aren't like Mario and Zelda, right? Um but I guess like we have a sense of like what Smash means to them and what like Splatoon obviously means to them. But is this a game that they're just like kind of quietly like it played its role and now they're like moving on, or
Yeah, I would be really curious to know if they think about it at all. You know what I mean? I kind of view
right?
it as, from my experience, I view it as like an extremely noble failure, I guess. Like I cannot believe the amount of care that was put into designing this game, and you can tell that everything was really thought through and tried to like everything is packed with as much detail and like
Yeah.
love as possible. But I just don't think it works as a package for me. Like I walked away from the game being like, I think the way I would recommend it to people is like, if you are at all intrigued, I would buy it cheap and
Yeah.
experience the first few hours, because it is such a unique experience. I have never played a game like this before. Even though the parts are familiar from maybe other things, like the package is completely unique. But and maybe you'll end up like loving it and wanting to go all the way through. But I think it's worth experiencing for just even a few hours. I would just try to find it for cheap.
It's so interesting because like I don't consider this game like a failure for me, right? Like I did finish the game, and there was a period there where I wasn't sure if I was going to finish it, right? Like when I was getting into like the late teen chapters where I was like, this is becoming kind of a slog. I don't really know that I want to keep like experiencing this. But as you get closer to the end, the story gets weirder, and they start riffing. Like individual chapters start being different experiences, right? Like I mentioned the one where you play as Magnus. I mentioned the one where you play as Dark Pit. There are a few that invert the land battle to flight formula. So like you do the land battle first and then fly away. And then the final one is just a straight up flying segment the whole time. And you're in a new set of like, magical treasures that basically turn it into, like the end of a Kirby game. And so like it ramps back up in a way that, like you said, the first couple hours are enjoyable. I think also the last couple hours are very enjoyable. And it's really only like an 11 or 12-hour campaign, all things told. So like, yeah, I guess there are a few lumpy hours in the middle. But I think overall, I liked this game way more than I expected to. Mark, any other thoughts or feelings about Kid Icarus Uprising?
In a very strange way, it does feel like the natural progression for Kid Icarus. Like if there had been, a Super Kid Icarus and a Kid Icarus 64, and we kept getting Kid Icarus installments, it's like, yeah, I can see how these first two Kid Icarus games eventually became something like Kid Icarus Uprising for sure.
And by the time we're putting something out on 3DS, we need to revisit the story from the original one again. Yeah, that feels real to me. Okay, so that is our experience with Kid Icarus Uprising. Mark, let's close this conversation out. Mark, let me ask you this. Is this the first game series that we've played all the entries of for this show?
I think so.
We did it. We played a whole series from start to finish. Kid Icarus, Of Myths and Monsters, and Uprising. We did them all. We played them all. We got it.
And we promise if Nintendo ever makes another Kid Icarus game, we will play that one as well.
Ooh, okay, all right. Well, we didn't talk about that ahead of time, but I guess now we're committed. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Remember, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Not subscribe, follow us on Apple Podcasts. We're not asking you for money. If you like the episode, you can share it on Facebook or Twitter or wherever you share stuff. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Elders. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at NinCart Society. We also have a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thank you for listening.
Oscar, Rachel, do you like Disney movies?
Yeah!
Have you seen all of them?
Yeah, we saw all the Disney animated movies.
And we saw all the Pixar animated movies, too.
How about the DComs?
What?
The Disney Channel original movies. You should listen to our podcast, Inside the Disney Vault, because we are watching all of them in chronological order.
Yeah, and we do fun segments, like we cast each other.
That's right, and my favorite segment, Zaddy Watch, where we rank every single DCOM daddy.
Ooh, you can listen to all this fun stuff on our podcast, Inside the Disney Vault on Campfire Media, wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, guys, let's get back in the vault. It's cold out here.
Campfire.